welcome everyone to this very auspicious occasion. I like to think of it as the blessing of the book. This is the fifth book I've worked on with Karen and the Courthouse crew, and it continues to be a marvelous adventure. Karen is the consummate book project leader. I was pleased this time around not to be the last author to turn in copy. That honor went to, well, that's not important. Speaking of Dan Kany, it was great to have him on the team. His essay appreciation offers a multitude of perceptive takes on Phil's work. I have been a longtime admirer of Dan's reviews in the Maine Sunday Telegram, in particular, the way in which he really studies the work he's writing about. And he does the same thing with Phil's work, making aesthetic and art historical connections that enhance our appreciation of the art. I also wanted to mention that he's also helped revive the Union of Maine Visual Artists, which is a great organization here in the state of Maine. If you're an artist and you're not a member, shame on you. And thanks to George Kinghorn, director of the University of Maine Museum of Art, who hosted Phil's first museum show. George is one of the pillars of the Maine art world, mounting shows that are consistently exciting and provocative. Now to the painter of the hour. Philip Frey has been on my radar for a long time. I can't confirm this, but I'm pretty sure I wrote the first review of a show of his in Maine Times. That really dates it. I think maybe 15 years ago, and I actually can't remember where the show was. It might have been Frankie's.
It could have been.
Yeah. Anyway, but I do recall that I do recall pointing out that Phil was a son of Ellsworth, having graduated from the high school here, and that he was doing his art teacher, the all-generous and nurturing Ken Mike, proud. My part of the enterprise had two different phases, a first draft and then a substantial rewrite. You see, in the process of sharing my piece with Phil, Karen had learned a great deal about the spiritual side of the painter, and she felt compelled to ask me to consider revisiting the essay with this new knowledge in hand. I did so with great excitement. I knew Phil was committed to making art, to conveying the here and now, but his parallel journey toward self-awareness had escaped my attention. It made such wonderful sense. Sometimes my work with the Maine Community Foundation and my freelance writing life come together in a splendid way. Case in point, in late January, I went to interview a University of Southern Maine professor named Vaishali Mamgain for an article in the Foundation's newsletter about a new Center for Compassion at USM. In the course of conversation, we started talking about Zen Buddhism, and I mentioned that I knew this painter down my way who practiced this form of meditation. "Who was that?" asked Vaishali. "Phil Frey," I replied, at which point a great smile came over her face. "I know Phil, we're good friends." To have established this connection made our conversation all that much richer. And Phil's paintings and this handsome book presenting them enrich us all, whether we've known his work since the beginning or are encountering it for the first time. Those painterly revelations he offers us that testify to his intimate and open relationship with his surroundings. Phil Frey.
So I'd like to say a few words that expands upon what George and Dan and Carl wrote about. So from a very young age, I've had this impulse to draw and to paint. And that keen interest was wholeheartedly supported by my parents and Ken Mike, who is here. And also the artist Alan Bray, who some of you know. So, as with most things, one needs to practice to get skilled at it. Painting is no exception. But I think honing one's technique and clarifying one's vision are two different things. It takes a lot of practice to develop both. Chuck Close, an iconic American artist, once said, "Inspiration is for amateurs." Meaning that an aspiring painter can't wait for inspiration to strike. because inspiration is a fickle and unreliable muse at best. We have to just get about the work of painting, pick up a brush, get in the studio, grab some paint, and dance with the canvas. Henri Matisse said, "To look at something as though we had never seen it before takes great courage." One of the deep joys of painting for me is the process. It's a process of looking and seeing, painting and discovering change and inertia. Within the realm of creativity, there's a lot going on, both figuratively and literally. You're beginning with a blank slate each time. It takes some daring, and Paul Cézanne said something of this: "It's so fine yet so terrible to stand in front of a canvas." It takes some daring. You're using your whole body. We change the painting, and the painting changes us. Things happen, mistakes happen, discoveries happen. It's quite fun, and it can be a bit frustrating at times. As Miles Davis once said, what I just heard the other day on the radio, and I won't possibly try to get Miles Davis's voice because he has a very particular voice. You got to cool it a little bit, man. You got to let it carry you.
Did he say that to Coltrane?
I think he said that to his group of musicians. It was as an outtake. Yeah. So for me, that speaks to letting yourself get out of the way of the process a little bit and give into it versus trying to force things, which in my opinion tends to go a bit sideways. There's nothing more difficult, and this is Matisse again, there's nothing more difficult for a truly creative painter than to paint a rose, because before she can do so, she has to forget all the roses that were ever painted. So for me, painting gives me the opportunity to see things unfold, to see anew, to see with fresh eyes, to participate in the experience consciously, to get comfortable with the flow. The practice of painting helps me slow down a bit and enjoy. Life's a mixed bag of things, obviously. Some good, some not so good. But appreciation can be found somewhere, even in the most unlikely of places or times. In my opinion, this is the true power of art. It gives both the artist and the viewer the opportunity to slow down enough to see, to reflect, to enjoy, and to clarify. In Matisse again, there are always flowers for those who want to see them. If I do have an agenda, it's as Dan Kany suggests in the essay, to softly persuade myself and the viewer, my audience, to slow down, relax, and enjoy the fullness of our precious experience. When we paint or look at a painting, we are participating in its creation, because each one of us sees it differently. We are each unique and bring to the table our own perspective. We share this common thing, painting. That is the power, the awesomeness, and the beauty of it. No, I don't have 10 pages here. So I'd like to leave you from an insight from Matisse again. For whatever reason, I've always loved Matisse's work, but I started Googling quotes of Matisse the other day, and I started to pepper them in through what I was writing. And I found that it's interesting that Matisse, he had some insight beyond painting. So this last quote, quote, "We are to view ourselves with the same curiosity and openness with which we study a tree, the sky, or a thought. because we too are linked to the entire universe. Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank Pixie and the clan for that. It was very interesting because we're going to come back to the music thing in a moment, because you played two songs, folk-inspired, that both end on suspended chords. That wouldn't have happened 20 years ago, 30 years ago, ever in the history of music, okay? But now for us it's normal and absolutely gorgeous, right? This relates to what's going on here right now. We look and we see what we think is very traditional work. But what traditional is, what it feels like, how we read it, changes all the time. Every cultural moment we're awake. How we see tradition, how we see a painting, how we think about this changes. So I'm going to circle around on this. First of all, I've written about like 500 art review columns in various publications, and I wouldn't have anything to write about if it weren't for the artists. So my deepest, I got nothing. Inspiration is, that's for amateurs, you know. So my inspiration is the people like Philip who do this incredible work, and Karen who, you know, and Michael who bring it out and make it actually happen. So again, without the artists and without the people who support the arts there, I got nothing. So here we go. And I want to thank Carl, most importantly, for pointing out that not only was I late today, maybe he didn't, but I was pretty slow on the essay. But you know, good things take a long time, and so do the rest of us. So the other thing is, I left my notes down in Ellsworth, no, Damascus when I was raging at the traffic. Could I borrow yours? Your talk was absolutely terrific.
You can pepper some of mine.
No, I'm good. So Carl's, he's not only he was an editor for like Art in America. Not only is he a great prolific writer, but he's a beautiful poet. And if you don't know his poetry, look it up. He's excellent and very, very funny. So anyway, I want you, you know, to stay with me and enjoy this for a minute. I'd really like to talk about all the art, you know, in here. It's hard not to. I get excited about the art. And one of the reasons why I get excited about the art is the same reason why I get excited about music. It's something that can bring us all together. We're all here for a reason. But one of the great things is we can look at that painting. We can have a conversation about that painting in real time in front of the painting. And when we're listening to the music, there's this thing which is beyond just the words, beyond the song that you wrote. With that performance, we're literally sharing something in space. And like, you know, depending on what kind of music is, there's a groove. And that groove isn't just what you're giving to us, we're sharing it. So this energy is alive. And so the idea that we can look at like what Phil's doing, and it brings us together. And there's an interesting thing that happens in painting, which is that there's the place, there's that landscape, there is that sunrise, there is that moment, you know, that here and now for the artist. And he'll render, he'll start to bring this thing forth. So, you know, we can see that it's the scene, or this house, or, you know, that spot. But at a certain moment, something changes, where the primary focus goes from being that scene, that here and now, to being a good painting. And what constitutes a good painting? How do we sense it? How do we see it? How do we respond to that? And again, these things change in real time. Culture changes in real time. You know, how you finish a song, how you write a poem, what's acceptable? Does it have to be iambic pentameter or whatever? Or when Miles Davis says to Coltrane, sometimes you just got to put down the horn, right? Wasn't that it? That.
Take your mouth off the horn.
Take your mouth off the horn. Thank you. And that, that's very useful, by the way. And so, no, but that's one of the critical. Well, yeah, sure, probably. But that's the point, right? We're all here. But it's a really good thing for Phil's work. Because one of the trickiest things, so like when Cezanne's talking about, oh crap, there's this canvas, where do I go? The hardest thing, especially in contemporary art, is where do I stop? What we're looking at here 150 years ago in Paris would not have been considered finished paintings. And you know, we might think that Impressionism is the pinnacle of aesthetic beauty right now. But Théophile Gautier, who was a leading critic in Paris, I love critics because they're such jerks, said of Monet's Rue des Capucines, he called it black tongue lickings. And if I could ever say something that pithy and brutal, I will be proud of myself. But I haven't yet. Of course, I don't think that. But when we see work like this, it's really good to get in our head that 150 years ago, people could not have made that or seen that. And it's like the idea of abstraction. Phil's work has this propensity for abstraction, and abstraction is actually a very important part of his body of painterly thinking. And again, abstraction is only about 105 years old. And why it exists like that isn't because artists couldn't make something that was abstract. It's about what we could see. What can we hear as a song? What can we hear as a piece of music? What can we accept as a painting? And the fundamental idea that seemed to have come across at this one critical moment was that legibility mattered. We need to see that that is a landscape, or that is a boat, or that's a person. But at a certain point, it became enough just to recognize that is a painting. And that changes what we're looking at. It changes how we're looking at it, even when we can recognize it. So when we look at a painting like, this, like beautiful, I'm assuming that's a sunset. I don't get up very early, so. So it's, if you just turn it around, it's a sunset. Yeah. Okay, so that's sunset. So, but what Phil is doing plays into these things, and it wouldn't have been possible without abstraction. And part of it is that, like, he used the phrase that I use in here, and if you really want to hear what I think in a coherent way, it was edited so you could read my essay and it will actually make sense, supposedly. But the idea is that he's starting with an idea, a form, a space. He's going to render it, he's going to bring it into focus, but then he's going to allow it to move out, because there's a phrase that you use, which is, something goes from being abstract as it comes into focus, into representation. But he goes both ways. And so if you can bring something from abstraction into representation, you can also go back and take something from representation into abstraction. So if we look and we see like that painting in the bedroom back there, sorry to do that to you, but it's like I can't look at sunrises all the time, it's too early for me. But the idea of that form in the middle, and that form sort of is about the human body. It's a doorway, and the doorway is obviously created for the human body, like where Anthony Anderson's hogging that whole thing over there. You might see it as an exit, but that's a doorway. And it's all about the body. And so what happens is this thing will come into focus as he renders it, and then he's going to let the painting take over. And what we're looking at is not just that scene, but he's going to make it into a good painting. And we all expect this, and this is where the whole cultural part, our expectations, his expectations, what he wants to do with it. He has all these paths to go. He could change to E minor, or he could keep it in the major key. There are all these things that can happen from there. But when he does that, and he sort of reminds us a little bit more about the form, and this is like one of the great things about a key change, right? Is that you have a structure, it's very functional, it's moving in a really positive way, you set your expectations, and then you shift. It will help you go somewhere. So when we're looking at the strokes here, and the structure starts to come back through, then suddenly these forms can get really interesting just as forms. Like this system is beautiful. The swerve, it's doing a good reason. We see what he's doing with the strokes here. They're moving across the energy, the rhythms. Again, this is a very musical kind of thing. But then this tonality here, it makes sense. But just the forms by themselves, they become so beautiful. And he does this throughout the work, using his big 3-inch brush.
I'll get out of the way.
No, you stay right there. You look fabulous. And this is the whole, so anyway, I want you to sort of notice within Philip's work, there's a lot going on. What you might think of as traditional is hard to hold on to. What you think of as contemporary painting is very hard to grasp. And how to move back and forth within these, how to take on musicality, tonality, brushwork, color, to do this kind of stuff and have it function well, beautifully, aesthetically, in a meaningful way is very difficult. And Phil has brought a lot of things together. He's brought talent, technique, aesthetics, skill, painterliness, and a whole bunch of other things to bear in a way which sort of tilts its hat to an incredibly important tradition. And one of the things about, and this is, sorry, I'm taking too long. I have like 10 pages here. It's a difficult tradition because it plays into spirituality as well as skill, as well as art history, as well as into culture and our cultural expectations, and the fact that we're all hardscrabble Mainers out here on the coast. But one of the things that really matters here is the philosophy here. So like, you might be coming at it from a here and now sort of Zen Buddhist take in some ways, but the thing that plays into that very well is that sort of American philosophy all the way through has always been Romanticism. From before we came here, before we stepped off the Mayflower, it's all about the individual perspective, and my perspective matters, as opposed to sort of enlightenment, objectivity, and truth, and blah, 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 science, and, it's cool. Americans think we are that, but when it comes to art, we're not. We are, this is my voice, this is abstract expressionism, individuality, and if you look at Frederick Church and Homer, and Marin and Hartley and Hopper and the entire history of what's coming through here, the idea of the individual finding their own path and their own vision is just fundamentally important to us and our culture here. And this is something that Phil has done an incredible job at. So sort of bringing together sort of contemporary to the traditional, doing it beautifully in a way that sort of respects the audience and all of us and him and the people who are willing to represent him. It's an incredibly beautiful thing, so I'm very proud to be involved with that. So, sorry if I've taken too long. So thank you, but I want to thank you all for being here.
Out along the horizon,